The Fire Store, equipping protectors with passion. Every decision the Fire Store makes as a company is about its customers. As the holiday season has quickly approached, explore a wide selection of unique and practical gifts at the Fire Store's Gift Center. Find the perfect presents for firefighters, EMTs, and first responders today. The Fire Store's goal is to get you the gear you need when you need it at prices you can afford. Visit thefirestore.com for everything but the truck and shop its family of brands including Streamlight, MSA, Lion, Fleer, and more. Hi, Chris Mc Loone here with Fire Apparatus and Emergency Equipment. Welcome to this episode of our podcast. This is the end of November now, so this is just one of those podcasts where I'm going to share a few thoughts based on some things that I've seen, that we've talked about this month. Just a few thoughts that come to mind. First of all, we had a great month of podcasts. We kicked it off with Andy Sacadato and Bill Adkins. They talked to us about intake valve selection and the importance. They gave us some tips on selecting intake valves. We've also talked to Jonathan Brumley, who had done a webcast for us. That webcast can be found at fireapparatusmagazine.com/webcast. It was on larger handlines. We got into the nitty-gritty of it a bit in the webcast, but on this one, this was more of a discussion that he and I had. So a bit on water delivery this month. Finally, most recently, we talked to Kenny Fent, who talked to us about the National Firefighter Registry for Cancer. This is a very important program they have going there. It is easy to fill it out. We went through some of the nuances of it. I admitted to him that I started to fill it out, and I got real locked up on trying to figure out when and where I was exposed to different products of combustion over the past 30 years. So we went into that. He gave a lot of advice. He talked a little bit about some of the resources that are out there for people to use as they fill this out. It's really, really important that we get this filled out so that, should we develop a cancer, we can connect the dots to our exposures. So it's a really important aspect of what we're doing in the fire service right now. They have a big, they're looking to get hundreds of thousands of registrants. They're well on their way, but we can do a lot to get our information in there, and I include myself in that as well. So those were the podcasts that we went through this month. Now, we've been covering a number of different water delivery topics over the past few months on the podcast. This month we did intake valve selection, and we talked about larger handlines again. And larger handlines are where I'd like to start this month. I'm not going to give the whole thing away. Obviously, we got into a lot of different talking points. Lieutenant Jonathan Brumley, and he's with the Colorado Fire Department, Denver, Colorado Fire Department. But we got into a lot of different talking points, and one of the things that we discussed was the fact that I asked him if he had any advice, and some of his advice was that most of us are already carrying larger handlines. In recent years, handlines, some of the intermediate sizes like 2 inch, 2.25, 2 3/4. Before you get to 3 have become very prevalent. But, if you're like me, in recent years, we took delivery of 2 pumpers back in 2021, and those 2 pumpers do carry 2-inch line on them. That was a first for us. Before that, it was really, if the truck had a booster line, then we used the booster line for certain things. But for many years, it was basically, in terms of hand lines, it was basically 1 3/4 or 2.5. That was what we went to. If it was a room and contents fire or a couple rooms off maybe in a house, 1 3/4. If we got there, high volume of fire, we might say this is a 2.5-inch line fire. But really, that was what we had. His point was that we had it. So practice with the larger hand lines. Practice with the ones that you have. Get to know them. Have the pump operators get to know them. test your flows. I'll get more into that in a second. But really, and I think he said it best, if you get used to operating and get used to maneuvering those larger hand lines, the smaller hand lines take care of themselves. So his biggest thing, really, one of his biggest things was to get to know, to become comfortable with the larger hand lines that you already have. Now, there are going to be specific instances where, some of these intermediate lines will come into play. There, he gets into some specific applications, and he kind of gives some reasons why fire departments may want to consider adding these lines to their trucks. Now, something that's very important to remember with these is that, you really have to conduct your own flow testing once the hose, either prior to purchasing the hose so that you can get it all lined up and figured out before you pack it onto the truck, or immediately after. Different hose manufacturers will have different interior diameters. They will have different friction loss calculations, and they will, based on different pressures, have different flows. 160 pounds on one line, one line that comprises 4 50-foot lengths of 1 3/4 will be different than the same length of another hose manufacturer's hose. So you want to get out there and conduct your own testing so that you can really get accurate with what your truck is pumping at. In addition to this podcast that we had, I also asked in our November issue, I asked two of our advisors, Bill Adams and Ricky Riley, should fire departments be considering moving to 2-inch line over 1 3/4? They both had their own answers. If you haven't gotten your print edition yet, it will be that column will be online soon. Well, one of the comments, I'm not going to get into all of their comments. I know Bill said there was no correct answer to that question. Ricky was more in line with in the realm of you do you. However, one of the things that Ricky mentioned, and this was important because, as I've said, I've been doing this for about 30 years. And in that time, as I said, most of the lines that we were doing were, the 1 3/4. We had a bunch of different pre-connected lengths of 1 3/4. And then we would have maybe a dead lay of 2.5, and we did have a pre-connect of 2.5 as well. However, that was what we had. 2-inch, 2 1/4. I really had not been exposed to that until recently when we started to hear a lot more talk about it. Ricky reminded me, hey, we've had this stuff since the 80s. And one of the things that he mentioned was that his experience when he first started to use it was that these lines were overpumped. So really, it is critically important that if you decide to go with these, to get the flows correct. For example, there could be a 2-inch line that when charged expands to 2 1/4 or so. The flow. So you're not going to be figuring it out for 2-inch. You're going to be figuring it out for 2 1/4. So you do need to take all of these things into account when you're doing it, and actually getting those flows, getting the PDOT gauges out, or if you have an electronic flow meter, getting them out to determine what the correct flow is, so that you can pump that line properly. If you overpump the line, we all know what it's like to be on a line that is being overpumped. It's impossible to maneuver. It's a lot of difficulty getting it around corners. So, and plus, when you open it up, 9 times out of 10, you're gonna kill the guys that are on the line inside. So, doing your own flow calculations is critical when you're doing this. Now, another item that you want to be considering is when you are designing the truck. So, say you've got the new truck, it's on order. Or it's not on order yet, but you're specifying it. You're deciding what equipment you're going to buy for it. Make sure that you know the dimensions of that hose when it is laying flat, because you do not want to get the rig in with hose bed dimensions that won't fit the line that you're trying to use. That really, I've seen it happen, and when that happens, sometimes, yes, you can adjust a little bit. You might have to, overlap the lines a little bit on top of each other, but you might not be able to carry as much in that bed as you wanted to. You may have to go down 50 feet. You might have to go from 250 to 200. So those types of things are what you want to be thinking about when we're getting into these larger hand lines. Get comfortable with the hose. That is really the main message here. Anytime we ask one of these questions for viewpoints in the magazine, almost always Ricky Riley will say, whatever you do, make sure you're training on it, and that applies here too. If like Lieutenant Brumley said, if you get comfortable with those larger hand lines, the smaller lines will take care of themselves. So again, pump operators know what's happening. Know that there will be a different friction loss calculation for some of these larger lines. And remember your nozzle pressures, of course. I know this is kind of basic, but remember the nozzle pressures. Know whether you're supplying an automatic fog or a smoothbore, for example. So a lot of different things come into play when you are deploying these lines. But like Lieutenant Brumley said in the podcast, there can be very specific instances where you use them. So that is that. Know the line. We've been talking a lot about water delivery. Just wanted to mention real quick while I have everybody's attention. We just passed Thanksgiving. Now we are heavily into the holidays. We just got through Black Friday. We have Cyber Monday happening. That's starting today actually, or if I'm doing my math right for when this is going to deploy. But we have the Cyber Monday. Cyber Monday means we're going to start to see 1,000,001 Amazon trucks out there. We're already going to start having 1,000,001 UPS trucks out there. We are going to have consumers going back and forth to shopping malls, to all kinds of different places, especially on Black Friday for those Black Friday sales. Keep all of that in mind when you're responding. I know that this is my little public service announcement for everyone, but seriously, we've got a lot of drivers. If you think they're distracted under normal circumstances, when they're trying to make sure they get to the store to get one of the last items that's on their son or daughter's Christmas list, or an aunt or an uncle's Christmas list, they're moving. That's what they're thinking about. They're not paying attention to what's coming up behind them. And we see it all the time. We see it all the time with fender benders just in the parking lots. Those parking lots are going to be more packed with vehicles. So you've got to be thinking about that as you're trying to go through for the fire alarm at the mall. I know a number of years ago, I think it was Thanksgiving weekend. We had it was a fire in a dressing room inside a shopping mall, and it became quite the event. So you're not only dealing, of course, with all the apparatus, you're dealing with people coming out while you're trying to go in. Don't want to get too much into tactics. This is about trucks and equipment, of course, but keep that in mind as you're responding. People are not going to be paying attention. Even, I just think about intersections a lot, when I'm going through the intersection. I may get all the way over, I may have my turn signal on, but a car that I am passing on my right, that I will be turning in front of, because I now have requested and have gotten the intersection via my emergency lights and my siren, they are now going, they may not be paying any attention, and they may be expecting me to go left or straight, and they could end up driving into me. I think about that on a normal day. So during the holidays, things just get crazy. I live on a main drag, but on a corner. So my house faces the side street, but the main drag is on the right there. And I can't tell you how many. I'll be outside hanging Christmas lights up, and you'll hear the screech and the boom. And then you'll hear the yelling and the screaming as people get out. So keep all of that in mind. The holidays, people get crazy. Not only are they distracted, but they can be some angry drivers as well. So, but as we approach the holidays, and I'll be doing another one of these at the end of December. But certainly everyone at Fire Apparatus and Emergency Equipment wishes you and yours a very safe and happy holiday season as we move into it. Like I said, we just got through Thanksgiving. we'll be doing Santa runs soon. If you do Santa runs, be safe about that as well. But that's a great time as well, doing the Santa runs around the areas, participating if you do participating in holiday parades, decorating your rigs. If you're decorating your rigs, make sure you send us the pictures. We had a really, really great collection of fire trucks in recent years that are decorated, that are all lit up for the parade. So make sure you send them to us, chris.mcloone@clarionevents.com. Wanted to real quick just go over what we're going to be covering next month on our podcast episodes. Again, they're every Monday. They're deployed 2:00. They'll go live to YouTube, and then they appear. They're archived on our website at fireapparatus.com/podcast. You can also see them if you want to subscribe to them. You can see them. They're available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Google Podcast. Most of the major ones. There's a whole list of them. But certainly subscribe, and you'll be notified as soon as a new one is posted. Just wanted to real quick go over what we're going to be doing next month. We're going to do NFPA 1900 Part 2. These are going to be your questions that we're answering. At the end of the first one in October, we asked for input. We asked for questions that you have. We have a number of questions. We're going to ask our guests again, Bill Peters and Ed Rice, two people who were on the NFPA 1900 committee. Speaking of some of these standards, I just wanted to mention, 1900 is not the only one that we need to be thinking about that is being combined with a number of other ones. We've got another one called NFPA 1970 coming out that's going to combine some of the PPE standards. There's also NFPA, it's going to be 1850. It's going to be combining standards. So keep an eye on that so that you're aware of what's coming down the pike. Now, NFPA 1900, as we talked about before, it's combining 1901, 1906. It's combining the ARF standard and the ambulance standard all into one book that's about 300 plus pages. I think it's 350. I think that's what Bill and Ed said. Working on getting myself a copy, so I'm all up to speed. But again, we're going to be that's going to be our part 2. We are going to be talking about cold weather operations with Andy Sacadato and Bill Atkins. We're going to talk about, some of the things that you need to consider as we're moving into cold weather operations. And, one thing that you do need to think about is you may be sitting there saying to yourself, well, I'm in the South, I don't get the cold weather, which is typically true. A couple of years ago, Texas got quite the cold snap. And so, what you want to be aware of what could need to be done if you have that kind of cold snap. In Florida as well, every once in a while, we get one of those years where, we're all worried about, whether or not the Florida oranges are going to be available because of some cold snap there. So even if you're not in the, like a mid-Atlantic or a Northeast or a Midwest or Northern Midwest, kind of area, tune in because, I'm on the Mid-Atlantic. We get typically, we'll get down into the 30s for highs during the winter, but we do have those cold snaps where we're looking at, 20, multiple days with temperatures only getting into the 20s. So it is very possible. Like where I am near Philadelphia, it's one temperature. Where my office is in Rochelle Park, New Jersey, that's a whole other climate up there half the time. They'll get, anytime I get snow, they're getting more. So, so it's just, it could just be the difference of a couple hours. So anyways, we're going to be talking about cold weather operations, how to set your rigs up for it. Some other things to be thinking about just as you respond during some of these cold snaps. If you're responding in a snowstorm, I've done it. I know that I turned to my chief when I was driving. I was like, this is as fast as I'm going to go. And he was totally okay with it. Because you really do have to remember the safety of those in the rig. And of course, you can't mitigate the problem. And it was a working job, and you can't mitigate the fire if, you run off the road. So in any event, so that's kind of where we're at. Again, didn't want to take up too much of your time with this. Just a few thoughts, but think about those larger handlines. Think about, deploying them, and think about the ones you already have. Don't be afraid of upgrading or speccing out some different hose lines for your unique circumstances. We learned in NFPA 1900. Now, it doesn't necessarily have to do with hose necessarily, but we learned in NFPA 1900 that they're not requiring certain equipment anymore. They are saying now, like the fire departments that are buying the trucks need to design and equip those trucks to fight fires in their first due. And that's the same exact thing, with the larger handlines. Take a look at your first due. If there's an area, where swapping out some of your smaller lines with some of the larger 2.25, getting up to 2.75. Don't be afraid to do so. Just get familiar with them. And, most of us do already carry the lines. They're 2.5, so it's a little bigger and a little bit more unwieldy. I think, I can remember going through firefighting one, one of the things that we learned was, how to position them, how one firefighter can operate them. So again, this has been Chris Mc Loone with Fire Apparatus and Emergency Equipment. If you have a topic that we haven't touched on yet that you'd like us to explore, let me know. Chris.McLoone, McLoone @clarionevents.com. If you have any comments that you'd like to share about some of the topics that we've already covered, as you go back, you listen to the podcast again. If you have questions, again, let me know. We can bring them up in a later podcast, or I can send your information along to my guests, and they're all more than happy to answer your questions. So again, this has been Chris Mc Loone with Fire Apparatus and Emergency Equipment. Have a good one and stay safe. The Fire Store, equipping protectors with passion. Every decision the Fire Store makes as a company is about its customers. As the holiday season has quickly approached, explore a wide selection of unique and practical gifts at the Fire Store's Gift Center. Find the perfect presents for firefighters, EMTs, and first responders today. The Fire Store's goal is to get you the gear you need when you need it at prices you can afford. Visit thefirestore.com for everything but the truck and shop its family of brands including Streamlight, MSA, Lion, Fleer, and more.